So I should have stuck to rowing, right? When you fall out of a boat, you don't break anything. I was out cycling, if you're wondering, and I zigged when I should have zagged, and ended up breaking a hip. So I'll apologize up front. I'm going to go do this from the podium. I usually like to wander around a little bit. I may have to take a break and come back and sit at some point. Don't worry about the border thing there. I can handle that. Okay. What I wanted to talk to you about today, Rita and I were corresponding about what might make sense. I thought I'd try to walk you a little bit through strategy and how we think about framing strategy, and hopefully provide you with a framework that you might find useful. I'll say up front, it'll sound fairly simplistic. It's always the execution that's much more complicated. And to do that, though, I'm going to have to give you a little bit of background on Vanguard, walk you through how, sort of how we've come through this crisis that Deborah was describing. The other thing I might mention, Deborah, is you mentioned I became CEO in 2008. To be precise, it was August 31, 2008, and 2 weeks later, Lehman Brothers occurred. And my predecessor, Jack Brennan, who's a Radnor resident, some of you may know Jack. I always say, did you know something that I didn't? And might be the best market timer in the world. And of course, we don't believe in market timing at Vanguard. So it's really been a very interesting period for us. So with that as backdrop, let me start with a, yeah, you probably got to get rid of that. Let me start with a who is Vanguard, okay? And I'm going to start with a little picture. And I'd be happy for somebody to tell me what they think they see here.
Footsteps.
Yeah, it's not, by the way, it's not an Andy Reid Eagles play. After the last couple of weeks, we might need some new plays, but that's a whole other story. So what you see here is a battle, okay? It's the Battle of the Nile. And you're probably going, what the heck does the Battle of the Nile have to do with anything? So 1797, I believe, at the end of the 18th century, turning point of the Napoleonic War. All right, turning point of the Napoleonic War. And it's where Admiral Nelson, Lord Nelson, Horatio Nelson from Great Britain, defeated Napoleon's navy in what's described as the most complete victory in history. And what he did, and you could see the blue were the ships of the line of the French. And the French thought you would have to come to the far side, my far left, and come right down the line, and they would just sort of blast the British ships one by one as they sort of sailed through. And Nelson figured that he could go around the French into what were supposedly unsailable waters, very shallow waters, and catch the French in a crossfire. And he was able to pull this off, and as I said, it's the most complete naval victory in history. So again, what's this got to do with anything, right? Nelson was on the HMS Vanguard, and that was his flagship, and that's where our name comes from. And so when we were founded in 1975, our founder, Jack Bogle, was looking for something related to the Wellington era. We had the Wellington Fund, which was our first fund. We had the Windsor Fund, so we had this sort of British thing going on. And so he looked for something, and complete total victory is usually a good thing. So HMS Vanguard became the moniker of the company. And everything we do, for anybody who reads our stuff, we have a lot of nautical themes going on. We don't have employees. We have crew members. We don't have a cafeteria. We have a galley. We don't have a gym. We have shipshape. You get the idea. So a lot of nautical stuff. And actually what's really interesting, and this is a little bit of a diversion, but it actually helps bind us together. Sort of having this kooky language and these kind of what sound like outdated phrases and so forth, actually I think is one of the things culturally that binds us as an organization. We can come back to that if you want in the Q&A. So that's where the name comes from. But what we're really, better known for is, we're a mutual fund firm, and we're very different than the typical investment firm. And I'm going to keep coming back to this. We have a phrase that we talk about a lot at Vanguard, that strategy follows structure. And if you just keep that in mind as I sort of walk you through the way we think about strategy, I think it'll make sense. But a typical investment firm is owned in one of two ways. You either are a public company, you have public shareholders, or you're a private company and there's a partnership or a group, a family that owns the organization. And if you think about in the US, for example, T. Rowe Price is a publicly traded mutual fund company, so they have public shareholders. Fidelity is a family-owned organization. The Johnson family owns the majority of Fidelity. We set ourselves up to be completely different, and we're actually what we like to describe as client-owned. So if you're an investor, and do we have any investors out here? Oh, good, thank you. Always love to have investors in the audience. Any of our investors through the funds own Vanguard. So at the end of the day, we only have one constituency whom we serve. And I think this is, again, I'm going to come back to this over and over again, and that constituency is the client. So our clients are also our owners. And if you're a publicly traded company, you by definition have two constituencies that are somewhat in conflict. You have your shareholders, your public shareholders, and you owe them a reasonable return on the capital they've invested. And then you have your clients whom you're supposed to take care of. And the taking care of, you charge a fee for it and so forth. And in sort of classic pure capitalism and so forth, you charge the biggest fee you can get away with in the marketplace that the market will bear, and that's what gets returned ultimately to your owners. In the investment world, cost is a huge driver of performance. And I'll come back to that again. And so for us, that conflict, how much should we charge the client versus how much should we give to the owner, we never wanted to have that debate. And so we made the two the same. And just, again, keep that in mind as I sort of walk you through the strategy, because as I mentioned right from the outset, strategy follows structure. So with that as a little bit of backdrop, what are the big ideas that we've tried to perpetuate as an organization? And I would say there are sort of 5 broad ideas. One, this ownership structure. We're a mutual fund company, so the clients own us. By the way, one of the things I should have said as I was describing that, nothing sets me off more than being described as Wall Street. Because I consider, Wall Street's, first of all, it's 200 miles north, but second of all, we are Main Street. We have 25 million shareholder accounts, mostly individual investors. That represents something like 10 million families who've entrusted their hard-earned assets to us, and we look at ourselves as the fiduciary for those families. So when people talk about Wall Street, I always push back and say we stand for Main Street. And again, I'll come back to that. Second and third are really related. Costs matter. In the investment world, it is different than many other commercial enterprises. If you think about shopping, going out to a department store like Nordstrom's versus Walmart, you would expect to pay higher prices at Nordstrom, but you would expect to get better service as well. And it's always up to the individual customer, if you will, to trade that off. How much is that extra service worth? How much is the extra quality perhaps worth, and so forth? But there's a very clear trade-off. In the investment world, paying more does not get you more. It doesn't work that way. Actually, all the academic studies that have been done the last 30 years say that the highest priced investments are consistently the worst performers, because it's a zero-sum game at the end of the day. If the equity markets over 50 years return 10%, if somebody charges you 1.5% to manage your money, over a long period of time, you're going to get 8.5%. If somebody charges you 0.2% to manage your money, you're going to get 9.8%. I leave it to you, where you'd rather be. And so costs, and that leads to indexing. Indexing is simply matching the market, and it's the most efficient way to invest. So we introduced indexing to the investment world nearly 35 years ago, and it's become a real mainstay for what we do. And then the last 2 points I want to pause a little bit on. Virtual company, even before the internet. So the biggest breakthrough for us in the late 70s and early 80s was 1-800-THE-SHIP. And we went from everything being done through the mail, people could actually call us toll-free. So, for many of you, as I sort of look at the ages in the audience, you're going, toll-free telephone, a technology advancement. For us, it was huge, okay? It was huge. And then, of course, as we got into the 90s and the internet began to evolve, that made us an even more effective virtual company. But I mentioned the virtual nature because I think it gets at a very important issue that a couple of the previous speakers mentioned. Think about this. In the early days, our business model was read about us, let's say, in Money Magazine. There might be a little bit of an advertisement in there. You would clip a coupon, fill out your name and address, mail it in. We would send you a prospectus with an application. You fill the application out, and you'd send it to some mysterious post office box in Valley Forge. So, Vanguard, Valley Forge, PA, here's $10,000, put it in Wellington Fund. Think about that, what's going on there. There's absolutely, they don't see us, they don't come into the office. It was all done by the mail, and then eventually, then by the telephone, and now by the internet. And nobody sees somebody from Vanguard. We only have 3 main offices around the country. We don't have a lot of branches and all that kind of stuff. And so what that drives you to is people had to have a lot of faith in what they were doing. They actually had to trust you. And you heard me use the word fiduciary earlier. We think of ourselves as a fiduciary on behalf of our clients. And fiduciary is, has a Latin derivation. And it's actually 2 Latin words, one meaning faith and the other meaning trust. And I would say faith and trust are very central to who we are as an organization. If people don't trust you, there's no way they're going to send you large sums of money through the mail or through the internet. And just to, again, I don't want this to sound braggadocious, but I signed about 100 letters yesterday to people, just thanking people for sending us $1 million or more in one fell swoop. So think about that. I didn't know there were that many people out there who had $1 million to invest, but it was it all done electronically. Nobody came in and met me or met any of my staff. It was all done by reputation. And so that faith and trust in us as an organization is something that we take really seriously, which really leads me to the last point, and this is a principle which we believe in very, very strongly. Good ethics is good business. And it may sound a little bit like motherhood and apple pie. I think to this audience it probably sounds natural. In the investment world and in the commercial world more broadly, people don't talk about this that much. We actually are very overt about it. Every new crew member, when they start, they go through an orientation program, and either I or one of my 10 colleagues who are the senior leadership of the team meet with them. And we always talk about sort of the history of the company and what it takes to be successful and so forth. And we also always remind people that there's only one thing that's going to get you fired from Vanguard, and it's an ethical transgression. Because if you go back to this virtual company and the fact that we're owned by our clients, we view ourselves as fiduciaries, and anything we do to break that trust, to break that faith, if you will, is going to be detrimental. I'll tell you just a little side story on this because it sounds great, but I'm sure there's people out in the world who say, yeah, but that's not how it really works. It does work. So when I was my first senior role at Vanguard, I was running our pension business and the business that oversaw the endowment and foundation market. And we got a call from an endowment, local endowment here in the Philadelphia region, and they wanted to put $40 million into one of our money market funds. Pretty big account back in the mid-90s, and so the sales team was pretty excited about it. The problem was, in that particular period, interest rates were falling very quickly. And if we took a large investment in a falling rate environment, it was actually going to cause us to reduce the return for the existing shareholders. And so our portfolio manager very appropriately said, I'd love to have the new client, but this is not a good time for that money to come in. We have to say no to the transaction. And the sales team was a little disappointed, but it made sense to me. We ran it up the flagpole, everybody agreed, and we said no. Well, the client went nuts. And the individual who was representing the endowment called us and said, you have to take my investment. We said, actually, we don't. And he says, I'm going to report you to the SEC. We said, go for it. He says, I'm going to call the Wall Street Journal. I said, well, I don't know what to say about that. Go ahead. So he did. So the Wall Street Journal ran a story, and the headline was, Vanguard turns down big investor to the benefit of its existing clients. I don't know. I don't think we could have paid for that kind of advertising. And I tell the story because good ethics does work. Sometimes it takes a little longer to play out. You don't always get the headline in the newspaper, but it actually works really well. And it's been a, it's part of the DNA of the firm at this point. And we actually tell people, we actually use this example often when we're talking to people, and there have been hundreds of others like it. But we say, what's the Wall Street Journal test? And so any activity that's going on in the organization, how would it be reflected if it were on the front page of the Wall Street Journal? And if somebody says, I'd be proud to see it there, then we say, go, do it. If they go, well, maybe we'd rather it be buried on section C, page 9, then it's obviously something that shouldn't be occurring. And so it's a kind of simple rule of thumb, but it's worked for us pretty well.